My research is in anthology, which I sign like this. This sign looks like a flower, budding flowers with a stem underneath. I use this sign because it's beautiful, it's shiny, it's cohesive. It's a nice looking sign. Now, my work is in Brazilian Sign Language. That's something I love to research. Now, before we get into that, I'd like to explain a bit about who I am. I was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro. You know that place with that huge statue of Christ up on the mountain? Has cable cars leading down to beautiful beaches, swimming areas. It's famous. It's world-renowned. People travel there from all over to see this place, and that's where I was born. Now, eventually, I did move south in Brazil, but we'll go back to my earlier life. Now, I'm an actor, an educator, an artist, a poet. All of those things make me who I am. My inspiration lies in people, specifically deaf people and the deaf community. Now, when I was in grade school, my first language was Brazilian Sign Language. And I went about my way until I was about 9, and I had this sense of opposition, of angst and anger, until when I was about 19, close to adulthood. Now, some of my influences, specifically, the first person is a gentleman by the name of Nelson Pimenta. He traveled throughout America with NTD, or the National Theater of the Deaf. And much of my inspiration comes from him. There's another American deaf woman by the name of Ella May Lentz, as well as Clayton Valley. Now, this is way back in the day with the VHS tapes. Remember those? The big clunky tapes? I would watch those again and again and again. Now, I couldn't sign ASL, but I did understand it receptively. So as a young girl, I would watch these all the time. Another individual, Ben Bahan. You know, the famous storyteller? Oh, I love him. Again, as I had mentioned, my first influence was that gentleman, Nelson Pimenta. That's how I sign his name, like this, Nelson. And I'm so grateful for his influence and inspiration. Now, I traveled throughout Brazil doing different performances. And there are some video recordings. I did a lot of live performances over the years. And there's a little bit saved and archived from these experiences. Some things saved from school, some things from my personal life. But I realized there's so many gaps, so many missing parts. I'll show you what I mean in this video. I went to college and got my bachelor's and then went on to get my PhD. And as you can see in the video I just showed, this was my PhD. I didn't have a written thesis. It was video recorded. That may seem odd, but again, there was no written paper. You'll see what I mean with this next clip here. Again, it was all video, as you can see. Just a short clip here. Now, remember I had mentioned that I grew up in Rio and then I moved south to a place called Florianopolis. Again, that was south, the bottom of South America. And that's where I went to college. I got both my bachelor's and my PhD there, and then I decided to stay and I've lived there ever since. See in the top corner there, the lines on the icon? Does everyone see that? The 4 lines? That's the menu. Would you mind clicking on that, please? It's the same thing as a written paper or a book, same concept. So when you click on that menu, you can see the different chapters. Is that the ASL sign? Chapter? Okay, yes. So again, you have chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So you can click on the table of contents and decide where you want to go. And I do apologize, that is in Libras and Brazilian Sign Language. Now, if you're watching this and there's something that you really want to highlight or emphasize, how would you do that with a video? Well, I actually have a feature where you can do that. See right there, that icon, the pen with the line underneath? So when you click that, it will actually make the time bar turn green. It's the same as you would mark up a written text. You can click that on the video and it will mark the important parts with a green line. So you can go back and reference them later. Pretty cool, right? Now, what if there's a part that is really important and you would like to go back and reference? Well, you can see that one icon that looks a bit like a ribbon. That will mark something like a bookmark and say that it's important. So if you wanted to show someone else that segment or just look back on that important concept, then you can mark it with a bookmark. So you have the green highlighting, which I typically use for myself, just things I would like to go back and reference. And then the bookmark feature. It's pretty interesting, right? Now, I didn't set up this website and all of the formatting. I paid someone else to do that. I did all of the signing and the content portion, but I did have someone else do the formatting of the website. Yeah, that is not my expertise. That requires someone who's very skilled with technology. And actually, the person who did this was a hearing person, and they didn't know any sign language. So I was trying to explain what I needed. And then afterwards, that person had emailed me and realized that a lot of it was done wrong. So then during our second interaction, I brought an interpreter, and then things ended up working out. And this is about 6 hours in total, this whole paper. It was a bit tiring, as you can imagine. And it's like when you type a paper or write a paper, if there's one portion that's wrong, you can replace the word or get rid of it. Well, when you're working in a video format, you can't do that. You need to re-record that segment. So one example of this, I had the camera set up and I'm signing, and I had the piece memorized. And I realized that it should be in 3-minute segments. It's kind of like punctuation in writing, like having comma or a period. Because before, if I went too long, if my clips were 5 minutes, 10 minutes or more, then I tended to make more errors, and then I had to go back and trash all of that and start again. And that was a very frustrating process. Now, my master's, that focused on poetry, specifically symmetry within poetry. That was my master's. And with that, I did have the written text as well as the video portion. But with my PhD, there was no written portion to it. It was just the video. And after my experience with my master's, I thought about that process, and I was able to make sure that this time it was very successful, very seamless. One example is with my clothing. I made sure that I wore the same outfit. I had my hair pulled back. I had the same makeup. I didn't wear any jewelry. So I had that consistency in the videos. There's a little bit of a difference with the lighting, just because it depends on the time of the day. Now, you don't have that issue with written text, but with the video, that's something you need to think about, right? Is consistency. And in this video, you can see a little bit of difference with the lighting and the resolution, but that's just technology. It happens. So moving forward, the main concept or important takeaway is that my first language is Brazilian Sign Language. And many people have asked me, well, with signed languages, if you don't have a written text to study, how do you analyze this? And I explain that you can. One example is I had a panel one time. So this group of individuals were asking me questions after my presentation, and I remember specifically 4 individuals. 2 of them knew sign language, 2 of them didn't. The people that didn't know sign language, they were poets themselves, or they studied literature, but again, they were both hearing. And the other 2 people that knew sign language, one was hearing and signed and one was deaf. And the deaf attendee had said that they loved when watching my work, they can make notes and then go back and ask me about certain parts. It's the same thing as with the written text. You would tell the writer that there's some errors that they need to fix. Well, that's the difference between a written language and my language. Sign language is dynamic. my language, my signs, they're very specific to me. Over time, you need to correct the errors and enhance the signs and the language. And in the end, you end up with this beautiful final product that I shared with everyone. Now, on the topic of anthology, which again, I sign like this, how do we know what to select to compose this anthology? How do we decipher which works to use? What's the best approach? How do we plan to do this? A good parallel is think about a large field of flowers. Out in the farmland, you see just rows and rows of beautiful flowers. Well, how would you pick the best one? They all look the same. They're the same color. How would you pick the best one? How do you decipher which ones are better than others? Are they brighter? Is one perfect? It's the same with sign language. If I'm walking through a field looking at all these flowers, perhaps I find one that looks lovely, and I go to a different area and there's another one, and it looks perfect and beautiful and bright. And I say, okay, well, that must be the best one. Now, applying that analogy to yourself is tough. There's certain things I really like. There's certain things other people like. So it's difficult to decipher what to pick. In my case, this process took 4 years of collecting various resources from Brazil, whether it be videotapes, various archival materials. Brazilian Sign Language was recognized in 2002. But prior to that, we have examples of performances, poetry, comedy, the deaf community, festivals, etc. But there isn't any intensive research or about the literature, etc., prior to 2002. It's now our job to enhance the literature and the research of Libras for generations to come. We have the resources to do this. But we have to figure out how to compile these archives. There's one hearing professor who had the idea, okay, we don't have a lot of Brazilian history, but we could use American deaf history. Use their videos, their writings, and apply that to Brazil. Next question is, what do we study? Upbringing, family, friends, schools, students, college level. What do we study? What are we looking for? The next question is, how do we evaluate the poems included in the anthology? Who does that? Me? Do I look through the videos and pick what I think is good? Maybe someone else thinks that would be an odd pick or not a good pick. And I would have to explain my reasoning. Also, some videos, maybe they're blurry, you can't see them, so they should be redone to be preserved. Or in some cases, maybe we can't use that material. It really depends on the situation. But this is a community effort. Just like the individuals I'd mentioned before, Ella and Vali, they're memorable. And it's the same thing as people who grew up in Brazil. We have these individuals, you just need to find them. Memorable people who use sign language. And we need to close that gap. Another question, who chooses? That's another problem. If we'd like to archive these works, we need to figure out where they come from. Where do they originate? We need to look up the history. And this is difficult because back in the day, there wasn't internet. Now we have texting and emails and phone calls, but that wasn't a thing of the past. So it's tough. There's one deaf school in Rio, INES for short, that was established by a deaf French teacher who flew over to Rio and set up INES. And again, it's a deaf school, the first one there in Rio. And that was during the year 1857. We could reach out to that school and ask about the history and the archives, but a lot of it just isn't there because, again, the timing. This was so long ago. So we have to rely on people's personal experiences, the internet, etc., to find these sources. What is the goal here? Aesthetics in Libras. How it looks, how smooth it is. The wealth of Libras productions. The wealth of deaf folklore over the years. It's very valuable. Deaf authors from the deaf community itself. And saving this through video. We're able to compile these in videos and analyze it and research it, so we should take advantage of that. And this is such an exciting opportunity. Many of us watch things for enjoyment, right? We're used to it. But how do you analyze what you're watching? Is it for politics, for love, for horror, sadness, fear? There's so many different aspects to this. Now my Libras, signed like this. What I really cherish about this experience is that my thesis was the first signed thesis done in Brazilian Sign Language. The thesis and then also the video that I made. Now, all of the other students wrote papers, but mine was the first video submission. And that's a huge success for people all over the world because prior to my experience, the university had only accepted physical papers. And this was not an easy process for me to convince them to accept my video. It was a huge struggle. The people at the university kept saying, well, how could we save your video? We need a paper for the archives. And I had explained that you could archive my video the same as a physical paper. You can save it online. I have a physical video. I can leave it with you the same as you would a written paper. So we decided to see how it went. And 4 years later, after all of my hard work, I gave them the video. And the college said, no, we can't accept this. They said, we need a physical paper. Now, again, I have been working on this for 4 years, finally at completion, and the college said, no, I'm sorry, we can't accept it. I explained my case again, and their response was still, we need something. Okay, give us a short, simple blurb. So we decided on an annex. You know, that last section of a paper, kind of like a summary with different resources and documents. So I said, okay, fine. I will write you a short 10-page annex. And then I put the name from my video and all that information down on the annex, and the college accepted it, which was odd. I mean, it was a short 10-page annex, but they took it. And the important thing is, you know, my video that I spent 6 hours on using my native Libras was accepted by this university. And that was just such an impactful moment for me, that moment of success. It was such a tough process. It was a struggle. After all those years of begging for them to accept this, it was dumb. But finally, they took it. Now, you may be wondering how I gathered my inspirations in videos and my experience. First, we already discussed poetry on DVDs. The next bullet, I was a student of letras. That's how I sign letras. Letras/Libras. Again, I sign it like this. And that was a deaf studies program at a university I attended. Is everyone good on that sign? Letras? So again, when I was a student there, I was with other deaf students, with other professors, and through my experiences there over 4 years, I was able to see all of the different activities and assignments that took place there. It's the same as here at RIT. You do a project, give it into the teacher, they grade it on the rubric, and there you have it. That's a typical college or university experience. And during my time there, I saw that there was so much beautiful poetry done by the students. And there was about 1,000 students there, give or take. So I couldn't gather works from all students, but I decided to pick one class. Now, I had been at this university for 4 years. I had already graduated, and at this point in my life, I was doing my PhD. So I decided to reach out to one of my former professors. And I said, hey, do you remember that assignment that we did in class about deaf poetry? Could I see the videotapes from our class? And the professor agreed and said, yeah, but you must reach out to the other students for permission. And I said, okay, I can respect that. We can definitely make that work. So I received this collection of videos. It was wonderful. I could analyze them. I saw whose they were. And then I sent out personal emails to these former students asking for permission to use their videos. But everyone's at different points in their lives. They may have different names now if they're married. So I had to reach out to people and then form this web to find all of the students, which I eventually did. I also teach a course on Facebook. I'll explain a bit more about that later on, but this is a sign language course specifically about poetry. I also founded the Deaf Folklore Festival, signed like this, folklore, that happens in Brazil. So through these experiences in my life, I've used the knowledge to embark on these new adventures, such as the Facebook poetry class and the Deaf Folklore Festival. Oh, I almost forgot to mention YouTube. You can find various poetry videos on YouTube. Now, through this mixture of narrative, theater, poetry, performance, when you put all those together, you must think of yourself as an actor, as a performer. You have this narrative, you interpret it through the performance, and that all becomes part of the story. And you have this beautiful, shiny end product. Well, that is the essence of my anthology. Now, this graph here is interesting. On the left, you can see for a narrative, the emphasis really lies in the translation. That's the blue portion on the graph. Then underneath that, you can see adaptation. So you have the text, you translate it, you figure out how to adapt it and make it more about deaf culture, and then you create, but that's limited. That's how a narrative functions. Now, and this theory is by, you can see the person's last name on the side, Krentz. And I thought that was an interesting view of a narrative. Now, poetry is the complete opposite. With poetry, the primary emphasis is on creation. Then there's a little bit of translation, a bit of adaptation. But again, the important part of poetry is creation. Now, who is this for? Who is the intended audience? The deaf community? Deaf students? Hearing students? What can I do with this anthology of poetry? Who is it meant for? Teachers, researchers, deaf poets? And my final question is, who uses anthology? And how do we make it adaptable for all groups of people? It's our responsibility to figure out who the audience is. Is it a deaf student, a hearing person, an older person? Just like with technology now, young people adapt easily to technology, but older people, it's a little tough. You have to make changes and adaptations for them. It's the same thing with this anthology. I need to evaluate the group and figure out how to best assemble this for them. For college students, is it for interpreters, children, adults? You can make it applicable to all groups, but you need to ask for feedback. When people look at this, take notes, figure out how to make it best fit different groups of people and how to share it with others. It's a big responsibility, but I'm happy to do that work. I would like to explain one key difference between these two words, collection and anthology. So with anthologies, this is a collection of works that are already published. So from Brazil in my anthology, I have 3 videos, old videos. You'll see some pictures here in a moment, but there was just 3. That's not enough for a PhD. I needed to expand and add other works. Works about love, politics, angst, fighting, wars. Because 3 just wasn't enough. So again, love, war. How do I do this? Now, if we look at that top word, collection, that refers to the publication of new works. For example, the Deaf Folklore Festival, videos from that, or work from students from various class activities. That's how you form an anthology. There was a presentation yesterday, I believe by someone named Orchid, and that person described poetry as a metaphor with a tree, and then the artistic aspect as well as a tree. Not sure if any of you went to that presentation. That presentation, the presenter did a great job explaining this mixture I'm talking about of you need the tree, sun, love, care, and when all of those facets come together, you get the thing or the topic or the object. So in that case, art and poetry are part of this tree. And I thought that was a great description. Like with my example, this can apply to schools, it can apply to interpreters, to signers, it can apply to everyone. And there was another example with a fish. Is that the sign for fish? Yes, fish. Okay. So poetry is kind of like a fish, technically, right? Anyway, that presentation yesterday was wonderful. I loved the metaphors and the analogies. And that's very similar to the research that I did for my thesis. Here's the different types of sources I used. First, we have books, DVDs, and websites. And this slide is pretty self-explanatory. It shows the different sources I used. I selected works from 3 different countries: Brazil, America, and England. Now, the list is not limited to these books, DVDs, and websites. I wouldn't have enough time to cover all of those. Again, with my anthology, there's so many different sources I found. I mean, the list is endless. There's 4 years of research. I can't summarize everything that I used over the years. But that's the process of research. This concept of poetry being canonical. Is poetry universal? I have my own inner thoughts and thought process, but I can't see into everyone's thought process and own knowledge. It's impossible. I know what I know, and I can put that in poetry, and then perhaps other people will agree or share that experience. And then we get that universal sense. And then other people, if they never thought of it that way, then now they can see this new perspective. This is done for preservation, divulging information, pleasure, study, teaching. As you can see, there's the list up here, and then images of people to represent the audience. On the left list, we have the 19th and 20th centuries, 80s and 90s, states, young, children, adults, Black, incorporations, characters, styles. And that's a limited list. I could go on forever with that list. There's many more examples. And then on the right, we have deaf, hard of hearing, hearing, male, female, homosexual, heterosexual. And again, that's a limited list. There's many more examples. Gay, lesbian, what have you. So with an anthology, it's not possible to gather sources and views from every single group of people. Especially in my 4 years, there's not enough time to gather from every different type of person. So my selected poems included DVDs, deaf literature in the course of Letras and Libras, YouTube. And as you can see in the right list here, how do you gather these? You need permission. And if people say no, you figure out what you can do to get around that. And how do you do that? Do you pay for the sources? Are they free? You have to negotiate with people. And you can explain, well, this is for a project to pass down to future generations. And then perhaps people will consider it, but it really depends. Now, with a DVD, you cannot include that because of copyright issues, because they want to sell their DVDs. And I have no issues with that. That makes sense. I respect that. But in some cases, you can pay for the works if you'd like to include them. And then, of course, with YouTube, you can copy and paste links from YouTube. That's always available. My sign language course, Poetry on Facebook, and the Deaf Folklore Festival from Brazil. Now, when selecting the works to include in my anthology, I had to think to myself, what makes good poetry? What is a good poem? And how do I adapt this to various communities and represent the deaf community? The next bullet on my slide here, the use of Portuguese and the matter of titles. Oftentimes, live performers will not start with an introduction or a title. For example, we're used to seeing people get on stage, introduce their piece, pause a moment, and then go ahead with the work. Well, in Brazil, it's a little bit different. Oftentimes, performers will get on stage and just go right into their piece. And the audience is left wondering, what is the title? In this case, your only option is to ask the performer. And sometimes the performers don't go into the performance having a title or subject in mind. They develop it through the performance. And that's a very normal experience. So in that case, perhaps they have come up with one after the performance, or you can collaboratively come up with a title or subject. Now, as for the importance of the title itself, imagine a sheet that has subject 1, subject 2, subject 3. That's incredibly dry and boring. Right? Why would you just want a list of titles or numbers? In this situation, it's better to approach people one-on-one and have that conversation. That's one of the beauties of our language. Technology, specifically technology in the future. This is a really important thing to consider. Now, remember I had mentioned that I selected my sources from 3 countries, England, America, and Brazil. And I had mentioned that I use YouTube for some of my sources, and I love YouTube. It's one of my favorite sources of videos and information. And I remember one time I had saved this one video and I clicked to watch it one day and I had that error message, the smiley face that says that the content has been removed. And I was so upset. I was trying to remember what the video was, but again, it was removed from the site and I couldn't access it or watch it. So technology doesn't always save things the way that we would like it to. We can lose information if we just rely on websites. It's important that you download these things, that you save them. You can't trust technology and trust that your things will always be there. In this image, you can see 3 different types of collections of works. We have a collection, corpus, and then anthology in the right column. Now, starting with collection, these are unlimited sources. We have institutions, companies, letras libras, YouTube, websites, various events. There's so many different examples of these types of sources, and they're never ending. They happen year after year. People are always making new videos. It's like running water, having a large flowing stream. Can you just walk up and stop the water? No, it's not possible. It's just a never-ending stream, and that's how this list of sources is. You have so much to pick from. Like with the fish example earlier, you can find one beautiful fish in that huge river. In the second column, we have corpus. This is a database. And this has many different resources that you can access, different archives. Many of these sources are from various universities. And then in the last column, we have anthology, or the details. I'll explain a bit more about this. We have studies, translations, comments, elements, categories. Now, this is essential. Having these various groups to distinguish separation is very important. Different categories. The last 2, we have criterion, similar to characteristics per se. And then finally, are you familiar with the software Elan, E-L-A-N, Elan? It's an annotation tool. It does semi-automatic transcription. I haven't used that, but it's an option that's available. With an anthology, you must take it step by step. You have to follow a plan. As you can see on the left side of my slide, there's 7 steps listed out here. You must follow that process to get that final result. And over on the right side of the slide, I already mentioned that there's a lot of gaps in history and in these sources. And as you can see, these various festivals in Brazil from quite some time ago, 2004, 2005, 2011, and then this last one here in 2014. That last bullet, the Deaf Folklore Festival, we do have video saved from that. The other 3 we don't. And the reason we don't have those videos was a privacy issue. The people that did have records of those events didn't want to share. So that's why we have all of these gaps. Here you can see 5 categories. And I do apologize, this slide is written in Portuguese, but that last column means poems. And you can see how many each category has. Facebook has the most. You might be wondering why that is. Well, it's because if you remember, I teach a class on Facebook. So that's all of the work from my students. And back at the beginning of that program, there were 60 students. But over the course of those 2 years, it did slowly dwindle down. And if I remember correctly, I believe 25 students graduated. Well, not graduated, but completed the program successfully and became successful performing poets. Or some students went on to pursue other studies as well. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see there were 35 videos of sign language poems. Now, remember I had mentioned I worked off of VHS tapes, and then I switched over to DVDs, but they were really limited. Up at the top left, that's the person I had mentioned earlier, Ben. He's the famous performer who really influenced me. Then the other two images show myself and then another woman. But there was no way to gather new sources. I was limited to these videos. And then it came to me, I should use YouTube. I can have that class on Facebook, the videos from the Deaf Folklore Festival. And that way I was able to collect new resources. Letras Libras. This is the class I had mentioned before. It's an online course. A distance learning class. And I had mentioned during my research, I had asked to use student works. Well, this is that program that I collected them from. All of the videos from Facebook are here in this database. They're all saved from that course. Of the 35 different videos I analyzed, this is broken down into where they were from. And then on the left here, you can see the criteria for my selections, whether it be smooth, polished, professional, etc. On this slide, you can see the process of what I went through with each poem, but I don't have time to expand on all of those today. We do need to move along. As you can see here, each level gets more in depth. There's more to unpack with every step that you take. As for categories, I broke it down into 5. We have titles or subjects, and the second one, profiles. But again, I don't have time to expand on each of these today. We would be here all week. It's just not possible. I can't explain everything today. We're limited to 1 hour. And then if we click on that link, see we have a picture of the poet, the title. Can you scroll down on the slide, please? Those are all of the comments that I made about this piece. That's just an advertisement. Ignore that. That's just a boring advertisement. Get that out of here. So that page there, that is a website that you can actually go in and look at the breakdown of each poem that I used. Something that is pertinent, it is so important, is style. Poets need to figure out who their target audience is. What is this poetry? Who is it for? One example of this is through rhymes and rhythm. So you have the subject, and that's great, but you must have style within that. Doesn't matter if you're young or old, children, adults. It doesn't matter. Everyone must pick their style, their personal preference. You can see a list here. Rhymes and rhythms, aesthetics, playing with signs and letters such as an ABC story. Number 4, we have visual image narrative. Number 5, sign creation, again, visual image. And number 6, VV and movies, using the lens of cinematography. As for the results, what I realized is that 2 minutes is the perfect number, the magic number. Some of the poems were shorter, some were longer or too long, but right in the middle was 2 minutes. And this is good to know for teaching purposes, whether you're in a school or a college. 2 minutes is the magic number, and you can see that at the bottom right there. On this chart, you can see in the various columns, it starts with the titles or subjects. And in the second column, we have disciplines or subjects, such as history, biology. Think of it as in terms of your classes here, your courses. Different topics, different subjects. This shows that poetry fits into many different disciplines, different categories. In the next column, it shows the target audience, whether it be children, adults, elderly people. And then we have them separated by skill level, beginner, novice, expert, and also the person's age. Are they 1, 18, an older person? Even after my PhD, the research process is continuing for me. It's a never-ending process. And here's a list of people that helped me. Rachel, various researchers, students. Remember earlier I used the metaphor of running water, a fast stream. It's the same process. It's never ending. There's always new sources to gather from. Now, do you see that button, the collection button? It says acervo. That means collection in Portuguese. You can click on this map here, and each state will pull up a video with the sign for that state. Just like the states you have here in the United States. Brazil has the same concept. Now, the research paper at my university actually has switched over to a video format because of my influence. The university realized videos were better than print for poetry, so they encouraged students to archive their work through videos. It's important that we keep this momentum moving with deaf poetry. Deaf communities from all over the world need to be involved with this. Use our theories, our knowledge, and just keep this momentum moving. It's kind of like riding a bike. You can't just sit on the bike and hope that it moves. You must put the work in. You must pedal and keep that momentum. And that's the same as poetry. We have to keep the momentum moving and keep innovating and creating. Because if we stop, we cannot progress. We can't move forward. That's a metaphor I like to use. There are endless opportunities for anthologies. All of you can pursue your own personal interests, whether it be technology, animals, performance, really anything. You can use your creativity and your ideas to come up with your own anthology. And mine serves as evidence to all of you that it's possible. There's much work to be done beyond my anthology. Go ahead and explore your own passions. Use your own theories. Perhaps you could focus on something here in American culture. It's essential that we save these works, whether it be for education in colleges and schools, for interpreters, for enjoyment. So that is my presentation. And these are my hopes for not only Brazil, but for all of the world. Thank you. Here's some information about a festival happening next year, November of 2020. I encourage all of you to come on down to Brazil. The culture is different. There'll be performances, dancing, signing. I also would like to extend my thanks to a few people: Patty, Renice, Rachel, Peter Cook. Thank you all so much. And Jean, she's been translating and interpreting for me between ASL and Libras. And I also want to thank all of you, the interpreters, the audience. Thank you all so much.